The warning label. The quantum boundary field rippled like heat waves in summer, distorting the space within the reinforced observation chamber. Dr. Sarah Chen watched the readouts with practiced intensity, her dark eyes reflecting the holographic displays that surrounded her workstation. The Helios Research Station hung in high orbit above Europa, humanity's furthest permanent research installation, dedicated to pushing the boundaries of quantum physics. Field stability at 99.7%, announced the station's AI, its voice calm and measured, all containment parameters nominal. Sarah nodded, making a minor adjustment to the field harmonics. After 15 years of research, they were finally approaching a breakthrough in quantum boundary theory, the ability to create stable regions where the laws of quantum mechanics could be selectively modified had implications that would revolutionize everything from computing to space travel. Dr. Chen called out her assistant, Marcus Wong, from his monitoring station. "I'm picking up some unusual readings from the outer sensor array." Sarah frowned, pulling up the external feeds. Something was out there, something that didn't match any known human vessel signatures. The energy patterns were like nothing she'd ever seen before. "Multiple objects decelerating from FTL," Marcus reported, his voice tense. "Configuration unknown. They're huge." Before Sarah could respond, the station's AI interrupted with an urgent alert. "Unknown vessels approaching. Energy signatures indicate advanced propulsion technology. They appear to be scanning our facility." The main view screen activated automatically, showing 3 crystalline ships that seemed to flow and shift in the starlight. Each was easily 10 times the size of the research station. As they watched, a smaller craft detached from the largest vessel, heading directly for their docking bay. "Security teams to all critical areas," Sarah ordered, falling back on emergency protocols. "Marcus, begin emergency data backup. Download everything to the quantum encrypted cores." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as the station prepared for first contact. Sarah found herself in the primary conference room alongside Station Director Hammond and Chief of Security Kapoor, facing beings that looked like they'd stepped out of an artist's fever dream. The aliens called themselves the Ingenuity. Their bodies were vaguely humanoid, but covered in shifting patterns of bioluminescence, with multiple sets of arms and eyes that seemed to see into dimensions humans could only theorize about. Their translator devices rendered their harmonic language into precise, if slightly mechanical, English. "We detected your quantum boundary experiments," said their leader, who had introduced himself as Principal Researcher Zixtal. "Most interesting for a species at your level of development." Sarah caught the condescension in the alien's tone, noting how the Ingenuity delegation seemed to look through them rather than at them. "We've made significant progress in quantum boundary theory," she said carefully. "Our current project focuses on creating stable regions where quantum mechanical laws can be selectively modified." The alien's bioluminescent patterns flickered in what Sarah would later learn was amusement. "Ah yes," Zixtal responded. "Your primitive attempts at quantum manipulation. We observe your containment field design. Quite creative for such a young race." Director Hammond shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We'd be happy to discuss our research with you. Our findings could be mutually beneficial." "Indeed," Zixtal agreed, but his patterns shifted to something sharper, more intense. "We would be particularly interested in examining your quantum boundary generator. Our preliminary scans suggest its design is unexpectedly sophisticated." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Something in the way the alien emphasized unexpectedly set off warning bells in her mind. "The generator is still experimental," she said carefully. "We've developed very specific safety protocols." "Safety protocols," interrupted another Ingenuity, its patterns rippling with what might have been disdain. "Your species is admirably cautious, but perhaps excessively so. We have vast experience with quantum mechanics. Your safety concerns, while understandable given your limited understanding, are unnecessary for beings of our advancement." Sarah opened her mouth to object, But Director Hammond shot her a warning look. Humanity's first contact with an advanced alien civilization was not the time to start an argument about technical specifications. As the meeting continued, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The Angst-theory's dismissive attitude toward human achievements was concerning enough, but their intense interest in the quantum boundary generator suggested something more. Later, reviewing the station's sensor logs, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The Angst-theory ship's energy signatures showed signs of quantum instability, subtle fluctuations that suggested their supposedly advanced technology was pushing against fundamental limits they didn't fully understand. Marcus, she called to her assistant, who was analyzing the alien vessel's scan data. Pull up the warning labels we attached to the quantum boundary generator. All of them. The warning labels? He asked, confused. The ones about catastrophic resonance cascade. Yes, Sarah replied, studying the aliens' energy patterns more closely. Something tells me we're going to need them. Pride before the fall. Sarah spent the next 3 days watching the Angst-theory systematically dismiss 15 years of human research. The aliens had practically taken over the quantum boundary lab, their sophisticated equipment replacing human sensors, their crystalline computers interfacing with station systems. Your containment protocols are unnecessarily restrictive, Zixtal announced, his bioluminescent patterns pulsing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as intellectual superiority. They're limiting the generator's potential by at least 3 orders of magnitude. Sarah watched as alien fingers danced over holographic controls, making adjustments to systems they barely understood. Those restrictions exist for a reason, she said, keeping her voice level. The quantum boundary field becomes unstable at higher power levels due to resonance effects with normal spacetime. A limitation of your measuring equipment, nothing more. Another Angst-theory scientist, Valtex, dismissed her concern with a wave of one of his 4 arms. Our sensors detect no such instability. Marcus caught Sarah's eye from his monitoring station, subtly pointing to his display. The quantum field harmonics were already showing subtle distortions. Nothing dangerous yet, but precisely the pattern their research had identified as preceding a cascade failure. Your sensors might not be calibrated to detect the specific type of quantum resonance we're dealing with. Sarah tried again. We spent years mapping these effects. Dr. Chen, Zixtal interrupted, his patterns shifting to something that might have been patience or condescension. While we appreciate your species' careful approach, you must understand that the Angst-theory have been manipulating quantum fields since before your people discovered electricity. Your concerns, while admirable, are based on incomplete understanding. Sarah bit back, a sharp retort. She'd spent the past days watching the aliens' arrogance grow alongside their frustration. Every time they tried to improve the quantum boundary generator, the results fell short of their expectations. Rather than considering that humans might actually understand their own technology, they convinced themselves that human safety protocols were the problem. Principal researcher, she said instead, at least let us run a simulation of the proposed modifications before. A high-pitched tone cut through the lab, making everyone wince. On the main display, the quantum field harmonics graph spiked sharply before returning to normal. Minor feedback loop, Valtex announced dismissively. The field is stabilizing. That wasn't feedback, Sarah insisted, pulling up additional readings. The quantum boundary is beginning to resonate with normal spacetime, if we don't reduce power now. Fascinating. Zixtal interrupted, his patterns brightening with interest. The field is actually extending beyond our predicted parameters. Valtex increased power to the secondary containment grid. Let's see if we can stabilize it at a higher energy state. Sarah watched in growing horror as the aliens deliberately pushed the system toward the very condition she'd spent years learning to prevent. The quantum boundary field wasn't just a simple energy barrier. It was a carefully maintained region where the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics could be selectively modified. Push it too far, and the boundary between modified and normal spacetime would begin to break down. Marcus, she said quietly, initiate emergency protocol Delta 7. Authorization, Chen Alpha 93. Her assistant nodded subtly, fingers moving carefully across his console. Delta 7 would start a hidden backup of all system data and prepare the station's emergency shutdown sequence. They'd developed it after an early experiment had nearly torn a hole in space-time. Energy levels climbing, Valtex reported enthusiastically. Field expansion continuing beyond previous limitations. Zixtal, these readings suggest we could potentially extend the boundary effect to encompass the entire station. That would be catastrophic. Sarah snapped, patience finally breaking. The quantum boundary effect isn't meant to be scaled up like that. The resonance patterns are well within our ability to control. Zixtal cut her off. Dr. Chen, while we value your input, I must ask you to stop interfering with our work. The Encke's theory have forgotten more about quantum mechanics than humanity has yet discovered. Sarah watched as they continued to modify her life's work, ignoring every warning sign she'd learned to recognize. The quantum field harmonics were showing clear signs of impending cascade failure, but the alien sensors weren't designed to detect the subtle precursors. Their own technology, for all its advancement, operated on different principles that had left them blind to the unique properties of human quantum boundary theory. Director Hammond, she sub-vocalized into her neural link, we have a situation developing in the quantum lab. I recommend initiating station evacuation protocols. That bad? Hammond's voice whispered in her mind. They're about to find out why we put all those warning labels on the generator. Sarah replied grimly. And they're too proud to listen to the people who built it. The quantum field harmonics spiked again, longer this time. Sarah watched the readings with the same sick fascination of someone watching a tsunami approach. The Encke's theory had no idea what they were about to unleash. Field expansion reaching critical threshold, Valtex announced triumphantly. Preparing to extend effect to secondary containment zone. Sarah took a deep breath, fingers hovering over her emergency shutdown controls. Last warning, she announced clearly. What you're about to do will trigger a quantum resonance cascade. We need to power down now. Zixtal's patterns rippled with what might have been pity. Your concern is noted, Dr. Chen. But I assure you, we have everything under complete control. The alien scientist reached for the final override control, about to disable the very safety systems that kept the quantum boundary field stable. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, remembering all the failed experiments and close calls that had taught them exactly why those systems were necessary. Marcus, she said quietly, activate emergency recorder. Let's make sure whatever happens next goes into the history books. Breaking point. The quantum boundary field collapsed exactly as Sarah's simulations had predicted. One moment, Zixtal's fingers were dancing across the controls, disabling the last safety protocols. The next, reality itself seemed to hiccup. Sarah felt it first as a pressure behind her eyes, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The lab's lights flickered, creating strange shadows that seemed to move in impossible directions. On every screen, warning indicators blazed red. Containment field destabilizing. The station's AI announced, its usual calm voice taking on an urgent edge. Quantum resonance cascade imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately. Impossible, Valtex muttered, his bioluminescent patterns chaotic with confusion. The field should be expanding uniformly. These readings make no sense. They make perfect sense. Sarah snapped, fingers flying across her console. The quantum boundary is collapsing exactly as our models predicted. Marcus, initiate emergency containment sequence. The lab's emergency shields began to deploy, layers of advanced materials designed specifically to contain quantum anomalies. But Sarah knew they wouldn't be enough. Not with the safety protocols disabled. The field. Zixtal started, his patterns dim with dawning horror. It's not just destabilizing. It's inverting. Quantum resonance cascade beginning, the AI warned. Spatial anomalies detected in sectors 7 through 12. Station structural integrity at risk. Sarah watched as reality began to warp around the quantum boundary generator. Space itself seemed to fold and unfold, creating patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. Equipment started to float, then crash back down, then float again as gravity became more suggestion than law. "This is what we tried to warn you about," she said, fighting to keep her balance, as the station shuddered. The quantum boundary field doesn't just modify quantum mechanics, it creates a region where the fundamental forces of the universe can be selectively altered, but it has to be maintained in perfect balance, or a bolt of what looked like lightning, but couldn't possibly be, arced from the generator to the ceiling. Where it struck, metal seemed to age centuries in seconds, then reverse back to pristine condition, then crumble to dust. "Evacuate the lab," Sarah ordered. "Now. Marcus, send the emergency shutdown sequence to my neural link. I'll have to do it manually." "Dr. Chen," Marcus protested, "the radiation levels are the least of our problems right now," she finished. "Go, get them out of here." As Marcus began herding the shocked Ingenuity scientists toward the exit, Sarah fought her way closer to the generator. The quantum cascade was accelerating, creating pockets of space where time moved at different speeds. She saw a dropped stylus fall up, then sideways, then split into quantum superpositions of itself. Station structural integrity at 60% and falling, the AI reported. Quantum anomalies spreading to adjacent sectors. Emergency containment failing. Sarah reached the main control panel, her movements distorted by the failing gravity. The shutdown sequence would take precious minutes to execute, minutes they might not have. But if she didn't stop the cascade now, it would tear the station apart. "Dr. Chen," Zixtal called from the doorway, his patterns flickering with what might have been concern or fear. "The field, our sensors are detecting quantum effects we've never seen before. How is this possible?" "Because you assumed we were primitive," Sarah shouted back, fighting to input commands as reality warped around her. "You thought that just because our technology looks different from yours, it must be inferior. Did it never occur to you that we might have developed something you don't fully understand?" Another spatial anomaly rippled through the lab, and Sarah felt time stretch like taffy. She saw her own hands moving in slow motion, then impossibly fast, then splitting into probability shadows of themselves. The shutdown sequence was only halfway complete. "The resonance cascade," Zixtal's voice distorted as he spoke, "it's affecting our ships. The quantum distortions are interfacing with our drive systems somehow." Sarah cursed under her breath. Of course, the Ingenuity ships used quantum mechanics for propulsion. They'd be especially vulnerable to the cascade effect. If she didn't contain this soon, they might lose not just the station, but the alien vessels as well. "Station hull breach imminent in sectors 8 and 9, the AI warned. "Emergency force fields failing. Evacuation protocols initiated." Sarah's fingers danced across the controls, racing against time that no longer moved in a straight line. The shutdown sequence was designed to carefully collapse the quantum boundary field, bleeding off its energy gradually. But with the safety protocols disabled, each step risked making the cascade worse. "Zixtal," she called out, seeing the alien scientist still hovering in the doorway. "Your ships, they have quantum dampening technology, yes. Of course, but then get back to your command center and have them create a dampening field around the station. Now, it won't stop the cascade, but it might slow it down enough for me to complete the shutdown." The alien's pattern swirled with what might have been shame or determination before he vanished from the doorway. Sarah turned back to her work, trying to ignore how the walls of the lab seemed to breathe, how light bent in impossible ways around her. "Warning," the AI's voice somehow managed to sound even more urgent. "Quantum cascade affecting main reactor systems. Power fluctuations detected throughout the station. Emergency systems engaging." Sarah felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. This was exactly what all those warning labels had been about. Every safety protocol that they'd developed, every failsafe they'd installed, had been designed to prevent this exact scenario. And the Encke's theory had disabled them all because they couldn't imagine that humans might know something they didn't. Chain reaction. The quantum dampening field from the Encke's theory ships descended over the station like an invisible blanket. Sarah felt the change immediately. The wild fluctuations in local space-time became slightly more predictable, giving her precious seconds to think. Dampening field established. Zixtal's voice came through the station's comm system, distorted but understandable. But our ship's systems are becoming unstable. The cascade effect is spreading faster than we anticipated. Because it's not just affecting normal space, Sarah explained, her fingers never stopping their dance across the controls. It's creating a feedback loop between modified and normal quantum states. Your ship's quantum drives are actually making it worse. She heard the alien scientist's patterns shift through the comm pickup. What do you suggest? Power down your quantum drives completely. Switch to conventional thrusters only. Sarah paused to dodge a piece of equipment that had decided gravity should work sideways. And get ready to move your ships back. Once I collapse the boundary field, there's going to be one hell of a quantum backwash. Our ships cannot simply power down their quantum drives. Another Encke's theory voice objected. The process takes hours of careful. Then you have about 10 minutes to figure out how to do it faster. Sarah cut them off. Because that's all the time we have before this cascade tears apart everything within 1,000 kilometers. The station shuddered again as another wave of quantum distortions rippled outward from the lab. Sarah watched the readouts with growing concern. The cascade was still accelerating, but not quite as quickly as before. The Encke's theory dampening field was helping, but it wouldn't be enough on its own. Marcus, she called through her neural link, are you seeing these readings? Yes, her assistant's voice came back, tense but professional. The cascade is creating some kind of quantum knot. The space-time distortions are feeding back into themselves. Exactly. We need to untie that knot carefully, or... She let the thought trail off. They both knew what would happen if the quantum boundary field collapsed all at once. Dr. Chen, Zixtal's voice returned. We've begun emergency shutdown of our quantum drives, but we're detecting something strange. The cascade effect. It seems to be learning. Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd seen this in simulations, but never in reality. The quantum boundary field is adapting to your dampening effect. It's finding new ways to propagate the cascade. We need to. Her words cut off as reality hiccuped again. For a moment that might have been seconds or hours, Sarah existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously. She was at her console, and by the door, and halfway to Mars, and everywhere in between. Then normal space reasserted itself, and she had to grab the console to keep from falling. Status report, she demanded, fighting down nausea. Multiple hull breaches detected. The Station A responded. Emergency force fields holding at 40% capacity. Life support systems critical in sectors 5 through 11. Our ships are reporting similar phenomena. Zixtal added. The quantum cascade is beginning to affect our hull integrity. Our crews, some of them are experiencing temporal displacement effects. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to think through the problem logically. The shutdown sequence was nearly complete, but the cascade had grown too powerful to be contained by normal means. They needed something else, something that could handle a massive energy release when the boundary field collapsed. Then it hit her. Zixtal, she called out, your ship's quantum drives. They're designed to handle massive energy throughput, right? Of course, but we're in the middle of shutting them down. Don't. Instead, I need you to reverse their polarity. Make them act as quantum energy sinks instead of drives. There was a pause filled with the sound of reality grinding against itself. That would destroy the drives completely. The energy absorption would burn them out beyond repair. Better than being torn apart by a quantum cascade, Sarah countered. Look, when I collapse the boundary field, all that energy has to go somewhere. Your ship's drives can absorb it, channel it safely into subspace. It'll wreck your engines, but it might save all our lives. She heard rapid discussion in the Ingenuity language, their harmonics made strange by the quantum distortions. Finally, Zixtal spoke again. We agree. But the timing will have to be perfect. Too early, and our drives will burn out before they can absorb the cascade. Too late. I know. Sarah cut him off. Marcus, are you monitoring the quantum harmonics? Yes, her assistant replied. I think I see what you're planning. The resonance patterns. If we time it right, we can use the cascade's own energy to help collapse it. Exactly. Set up a countdown sync between our systems and the Ingenuity ships. We'll need split-second timing. As Marcus worked to coordinate their systems, Sarah studied the readings from the failing quantum boundary field. What they were about to attempt was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. They would have one chance to get it right. Countdown sync established, Marcus reported. Ingenuity ships in position. Their drives are ready for polarity reversal. Sarah took another deep breath, watching the quantum cascade tear reality apart around her. Everything they'd learned about quantum boundary theory, everything they'd warned the Ingenuity about, had led to this moment. Begin countdown, she ordered. And someone make sure this goes in the manual for next time. Dr. Chen. Zixtal's voice came through the comm, his pattern subdued. We. That is. Save it. Sarah cut him off, but gently. Right now, we need to make sure both our ships are secure. We can talk about what happened after everyone's safe. The next few hours passed in a blur of damage reports and emergency repairs. The station had taken heavy damage, but its core systems remained intact. The Ingenuity ships, stripped of their quantum drives, would need extensive repairs before they could return home. Finally, after the immediate crisis had passed, Sarah found herself back in the conference room. This time, the Ingenuity delegation's patterns showed none of their earlier superiority. We owe you an apology, Zixtal began, his patterns shifting in what Sarah now recognized as embarrassment. We allowed our pride to blind us to the possibility that a younger species might have developed techniques unknown to us. The quantum boundary field, another scientist added, patterns flickering with scientific curiosity. It's unlike anything in our database. The way it manipulates local spacetime. We never considered that approach. Because you were looking for technology that matched your expectations, Sarah explained. Human quantum theory developed differently from yours. We had to work with more limited resources, which forced us to find creative solutions. Those warning labels weren't there because we didn't understand the technology. They were there because we understood it all too well. A lesson we won't soon forget, Zixtal acknowledged. Our ships will require extensive repairs. With your permission, we'd like to use this time to properly study your quantum boundary theory. As equals this time, Sarah smiled, thinking of all the possibilities that true collaboration could bring. I think we can arrange that. But first, I'm going to need you to read the entire safety manual, all 1,000 pages of it, and the warning labels. Zixtal's patterns showed what might have been humor, especially the warning labels, Sarah agreed. After all, sometimes the most advanced technology isn't about pushing boundaries. It's about knowing exactly where those boundaries need to be. In the days that followed, as humans and Ingenuity worked together to repair their ships and share their knowledge, Sarah had a new warning label installed on the quantum boundary generator. Under all the technical warnings and safety protocols, it simply read, "Pride comes before a quantum cascade failure." The Ingenuity, to their credit, were the first to appreciate the joke. The end.